Okay, we're ready.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. I'm Joan, your COO here at the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library. I want to thank you all for joining us, and especially our guest speakers, Doctors Zuzana Pavlovic and Dr. Gabriela Beregaziova. These are our authors of this amazing book, Super Slováci. And just quickly, Zuzana is the daughter of Slovak immigrants. Born behind the Iron Curtain, her family fled the communist regime as political refugees to become naturalized citizens in Canada. Never forgetting her roots, she returned to Slovakia and has made it her home. Zuzana loves to travel the world and works daily to empower others from all walks of life to follow their dreams. She is the founder of the national global organization, Global Slovakia, and a 4-time published author. Gabriela, also, she was born in Slovakia and raised in Slovakia, worked and lived across Europe and the Middle East, earned 2 graduate degrees and her PhD in the field of corruption in Great Britain. Not corruption in Great Britain, but she earned her degrees in Great Britain, for clarification. Forgive me. She's the co-director of the National Global Organization, Global Slovakia, also a published author of 3 bilingual books, and works actively to promote Slovakia abroad and to educate the Slovak society at home. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, ladies, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those introductions were lovely. It's interesting to hear yourself introduced. We couldn't help but smile. But thank you so much. It's a great privilege for us to connect with you guys today and to also speak to your audience at the museum. It's always a privilege for us to expand our reach and connect with new people. So welcome. Welcome to today's program, where we're going to actually explore our latest book. So our 4th publication, as was already mentioned. We've been very busy bees putting out books, and this presentation is going to be about Super Slováci, Super Slovaks, 50 Slovaks that changed Slovakia and the world. And through this presentation, we're just going to cover a brief history of Slovakia, because there's many ways that you can appreciate this book. You can learn about the personalities, the movers and shakers of the small country from the heart of Europe. You can be inspired by their stories of overcoming hardships and challenges, or you can actually use it as a tool and a vehicle to better understand the context, the texture, the historical journey that Slovakia has gone through over the past several centuries, if not millennia, if we go back to Svetopluk. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So what is Global Slovakia? Global Slovakia is a non-for-profit organization, and our ambition is to share Slovakia with the world. We're kind of unique in terms of our positioning because we do this in the English language. Since I'm a Slovak expat that has returned, I spent most of my life abroad. I grew up in Canada, later the United States. I'm actually dual citizen between Canada and Slovakia. Gabriela, as was mentioned, spent a great many years abroad and doing her foundational higher educational studies, including her doctoral degrees in the United Kingdom. So we both kind of developed a perspective of understanding Slovakia, but from a foreign lens, from a global lens, which is why we put our minds together to create this mastermind. And out of the mastermind has been birthed many books and many more coming, as well as an academy and a frequent series of webinars that range from once to twice a month, where we cover a range of themes related to Slovakia, whether it's history, culture, food, you name it, we talk about it. So that's a little bit about our organization. You can, of course, go visit our website, globalslovakia.com, or better yet, to actually follow us on Facebook, where we have a pretty active following and we put out daily content about Slovakia and our many projects. We could go to the next slide.
So before we go to the next slide, just a hello from me too. It's a great pleasure to spend our Saturday evening, our time with you. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover today. So we'll take you on a journey into the history of Slovakia as viewed through the destinies and stories of Slovak men and women. Some of them you will know, some of them hopefully will be new faces to you. So we'll learn something new together today. And then there will be a space for question and answers at the end. There is also a chat available to you if you do not feel comfortable, speaking online. You can always pop it there, and we'll be monitoring it and answering the questions there as well. So over to you, Susie.
Sure. We're going to just also be careful with our timekeeping, because usually on our webinars, we tend to go about an hour over, but this time we have a clear time slot of 1 hour. So we might have to even clip some of this presentation faster, because we do want to make sure we leave some Q&A time. So we're first going to start with this video. If we can, this video explains actually just very briefly why we wrote this book. And in it, you meet actually the 3 co-authors behind it. So it's Gabriela and I, but also David Keyes, who's a 20-year pedagogue. He's an educator in history and the history of knowledge with high school students in Slovakia. He's also a British expat that has chosen Slovakia as his home for his family. He has lived in the country about 25 years. So we were very grateful to pair with him on the production of this book, because we also got to harness his experience of being an educator of children.
So we'll play the video. Please let me know if it's playing okay with you, because sometimes there are issues for this. Oh, hang on. I just realized there is one setting I have to press in order for you to hear the sound. So if you just give me a second, I'll fix that.
So while Gabriela is doing that, I'll just give a little bit more background on the book. The book is truly written for people of all ages, from all walks of life. It's not a book you have to read from cover to cover to understand it. You can pick it up, read a few pages, put it down. However, the intention behind the production of the book was really to ignite the younger generation. So we've written 3 books before this that were mainly written for an adult audience, and we felt that if we really want to have an impact, we have to start speaking to young people, because young people are the future, and young people's minds are still not yet fully formed. So they're very almost malleable, open-minded, in terms of shifting their consciousness and pushing it maybe in a more positive direction. And we wanted the young people in Slovakia to start to see themselves as the designers of their destiny, and that their lives matter, and that what they do with their lives not only impacts themselves and their families and their immediate neighborhoods, but can also shape the country, can change the destiny of a country. And when you shape the destiny of Slovakia, you of course inadvertently also affect the world. So that's what we wanted to show young people in Slovakia, that sometimes view Slovakia as not really relevant on the global stage, through this book, that these movers and shakers that changed Slovakia's destiny inadvertently or advertently had a positive effect on the world. And that video explains that a little bit more, but if we're having problems, we can skip it.
Yeah, I think we're going to be skipping. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so we can start with the PowerPoint again. Okay, sure. So here we have a map of Slovakia. Again, it was very, very important for us to show the youth that the personalities that come from this book are actually not predominantly from the capital of Bratislava or the western part of the country, which is the wealthiest, where the jobs and opportunities are truly concentrated, but actually, and in reality, they come from all walks of life, from all over the Republic. And that was just a very, very important, and quite naturally we captured it in this map. So our intention was to really capture people from different sectors, whether it was art, politics, science, but also to highlight people from different regions. And this happened very naturally in the production of this book.
And it's also wonderful to see that Slovakia, such a small country of 5 million, has all these icons of men and women coming from all over the place. So it's a bit of a miracle to think that a man from a tiny village in Western Slovakia that you will not even find on a normal map became one of the founders of Czechoslovakia. So these are things that are so fascinating. once you dive into the Slovak history and culture and context. So, and that map captures it really well. So we will start at the beginning with the first Slavic state in the region of Central Europe, but it's also possible that was the very first Slavic state in the world. It was Great Moravia, and it was founded even before Kievan Rus, which is much more famous, and it grew to be much bigger and lasted much longer. Great Moravia was around for about 70 years, and it shaped who we are as a country and as a nation, and it really laid the foundation for Czechoslovaks then to claim sovereignty and nationhood in the 20th century after the First World War. So Great Moravia was an immensely important part of our history, and not just of our history, but also of Slovak and Czech national myth-making. So with Great Moravia as the first kind of state entity, that we know of from various chronicles, domestic and foreign at the time, was quite a miracle at the time too, because there was much upheaval going on in Europe, much competition between the empires of the East and the empires of the West. And amid all of that arose this state, the Great Moravia, and Svetopluk was its last great leader, sometimes referred to as the king of Great Moravia or the king of Moravians. And it was during his reign that Great Moravia expanded exponentially, and it covered modern-day Slovakia, but also Czech Republic, parts of Poland and Hungary. So this is when Great Moravia became a power to be reckoned with. It could not be ignored by the mighty and the powerful of the time. The shame about all this was that the glory did not last past the death of King Svetopluk himself. He was a wise politician, but also an exceptional military leader, and kind of the success and the existence of the state really depended on him. But when he died, he left behind 3 sons. So technically speaking, Great Moravia should have been okay. But the 3 of them could not really navigate the treacherous waters of international politics at the time. There were many internal disagreements and disputes within the country. So when the new tribe, the Magyars or the Hungarian nomads, came from the east, Great Moravia started to crumble under their pressure and under the pressure of the Frankish Empire. And eventually it fell in the 10th century. But its existence for that duration of time was something that Slovaks are very proud of, and something that we base our identity and our legitimacy as a sovereign nation on today.
Great. So we're going to now flash forward to the Middle Ages, and we're going to look at another key personality. It's Jan Jesenius. And he was actually born in what is now Poland, but it was referred to as Slovak, and actually came into his professional self-realization in Prague, where he was actually also killed. And he is a very interesting take on Slovak movers and shakers and being maybe on the wrong sides of the tracks in history. So he was born in the 17th century. And at that time, much of what was known about the human body was observed from outside of it. So Jan was not only an excellent doctor, he healed kings and princes. So he was in service to the noble class, the elites, but he was also very much a rebel. And he pushed the frontiers of science. He was renowned for performing a public autopsy in Prague, which at the time was really, really unheard of. And that is also because of the control of the church. So it didn't necessarily want to allow something like the sacred body to be cut up in the name of science. However, Jan advocated that in order to understand the body better and its functions, we actually do need to look inside of it. In addition to his rebellion or his progressiveness in science, he was also very progressive politically and religiously. And he was quite active in supporting the Protestants during a time when they were fighting Catholics all over Europe. This later became to be known as quite an extended conflict, a 30-year war, where many Europeans actually died or were massacred in the name of religion. Unfortunately, in this battle, Jan, or fortunately in the beginning, actually made a bet and supported the Protestant king, who eventually did become the Austro-Hungarian or the Austrian Habsburg emperor. But however, his reign was very much short-lived. So he was referred to as the Winter King. Once he was ousted after his very short reign, a Catholic king became the emperor, and this was very, very bad news for Jan and his Protestant posse that were very, very influential. So as a consequence of their beliefs and supporting the person on the wrong team, they were basically rounded up, put in prison, and Jan was eventually sentenced to death for his beliefs and his activities against the Catholics and the Catholic Church. He was executed in Prague. However, the authorities were very, very scared of his scientific abilities and had his body chopped up into quarters because they believed he would be able to bring himself back to life with his scientific capacities.
So it's the life of Jan Jesenius really captures those perilous periods of European history that Slovakia was always in the heart of, because it's in the heart of Europe. And the religious wars between the Catholics and Protestants, they really wrecked the region and the country for many decades. Moving on, a couple of centuries later, to Juraj Janosik, whom you might know. He is also referred to as the Robin Hood of Slovaks, and we receive mixed reactions to having him featured in the book, because he was an outlaw. As legend has it that he robbed the rich and he gave to the poor. And this is the legend that was created kind of to bolster the Slovak identity and also to celebrate the people, the folk of Slovakia, especially after communists took power in 1948 in Slovakia. So they really wanted to glorify the ordinary people. But the real man was a little more complex than that. Yes, he was a robber. He was a highwayman who robbed the rich, certainly, but he probably didn't give that much to the poor. And he was captured at the end of his short and intense life, and he was hanged by his rib, which only, of course, kind of supported the creation of the legends because of the horrendous way that he died. But his destiny it mirrors the difficulties and the struggles of people in Slovakia at the time. So this was the 17th century, when the region was once again in tatters because there were, again, political conflicts play. We had the Ottomans sort of controlling a large swathes of the Kingdom of Hungary, pretty much the entire country. We had the Habsburgs, and then we had the Hungarians who fled from Hungary, or the Hungarian aristocracy that fled from the occupied Hungary into the territory of modern-day Slovakia. And these were all engaged in a very complex and lengthy conflict. And of course, who suffered the most were the people. They really bore the weight on their shoulders. It was they had to face hefty taxes in order to support these military campaigns. Later on, they had to pay more taxes because the Habsburgs closed a deal with the Ottomans, but it was an unfavorable one. So the people suffered, and they did not really have a say about their life or about what direction politics of country is going to take. So Juraj Janosik emerged from Slovak history and literature as the hero of the people who dared to defy the odds, who dared to defy the authorities and the unfairness of life and take destiny into his hands and to live in freedom at these very difficult and unfree times. So that's how complicated and complex the story of Janosik is, but he continues really to entertain our personal and collective imagination as the hero of the people, as somebody who stood up against the elites and said enough.
Just to make it a little bit more relatable for the audience, Janosik is the Slovak version of Robin Hood, per se.
Yeah, that's
so
what I said.
A folk figure, a folk hero.
He was a real man, and we uncover more of the story, and the interest in his persona and his life doesn't cease with time. The sort of most popular musical in Slovakia is based around this theme and on the life of Janosik, and it's still performed today after decades of being up public. So that's how fascinating he is for us.
And it's also interesting, just these two personalities that we chose when we were selecting the people who to say we didn't actually look at their entire lives and try to match them. But with Jesenius and Janosik, you can see that both men were eventually persecuted or sentenced to death for their beliefs and their actions. So it's a very harsh period in Slovakia, actually all over Europe, where what you thought and how you acted really could have serious consequences depending on where the power swayed. So the next story that we're going to introduce to you is a little bit more gentle and a little bit more uplifting. Thankfully, it doesn't end in execution. The story is of Panatinka. It's of a Romani girl, of a gypsy girl that was actually a violinist virtuoso. And she's another example or another fascinating story of this era. And she's proof that Super Slovaks, and especially the Super Slovaks in our book, were not born to ideal families and ideal conditions. Sometimes they were born on the periphery of society, as in this case, Panatinka was, or Tinkapana. But rather, despite the hardships that they faced, they actually rose above them, achieved excellence, and are now renowned throughout history, as we're celebrating them today in the 21st century. So from a young age, Panatinka demonstrated prodigy potential of being a violinist virtuoso. She very much loved this instrument and played it. Word quickly spread in her neighborhood and community of her talent. However, although she did come from a gypsy family and music was very, very prominent to their culture and daily way of life, women and girls were allowed to sing and dance only. So they were not allowed to play with tools, so to perform on instruments. Nevertheless, despite facing these limitations and being discouraged and shunned and punished for playing an instrument, she continued and she persevered. And eventually she landed or was given or granted an opportunity to study at the musical academy, where she further perfected her skill. And upon leaving the school, she actually formed her own band composed of her family, where she was the lead violinist virtuoso of it. This band, and particularly Panatinka's abilities, soon expanded. Her fame grew, and eventually she was asked to perform in the imperial capital of Vienna in the Viennese court by the very Empress Maria Theresa herself. So she is an example of, if you persevere and you continue to do what you love, despite the hardships, eventually pathways and doorways will open, and they will go so far that you will venture from your tiny little village in obscure Slovakia, then part of the Kingdom of Hungary, all the way into the capital city of Vienna to perform before the highest nobility, the Empress herself.
And also, she was not just from a small town, she was from a marginalized community in Slovakia back then and even today. So her story is inspiring, and it's a proof that anybody can achieve their dream if they put work and dedication to it. And she lived and created her art in the 18th century, just so you can place her historically.
So that was the reign of one of the most famous empresses of the Habsburg era, and perhaps of Europe altogether. It was the reign of Empress Maria Theresa.
And this was also the age of enlightenment, which opened up new possibilities. This is when people started to talk about human and national rights. And this is also thanks to that Tsinka Pana and other women could come more into prominence, because their role in the society at the time was very much tied to the household, to the kitchen, and to the cradle. So that movement enabled women to step up and step forward and show what they could do. And we continue with Pavel Dobzinski, whom you might be familiar with. He is also known as the father of the Slovak fairy tale. So he was born in northeastern Slovakia. And everybody made fun of him because already as a grown man, he loved fairy tales and folk legends so much that he made it not just his passion, but his career. And he gave himself the goal to collect and to travel to the various corners of Slovakia and to collect the stories of the people, to record them for the very first time, because he understood that I know it's wonderful to pass stories and wisdoms orally, but if they're not recorded, if they're not written down, then it's very easy to lose this heritage. So that was one reason, but he also had a political motivation to his activities, because he was involved in the so-called Slovak National Awakening movement, which for the first time brought up the issue of Slovaks being a nation, having a national right, having a right to speak their own language, to be educated in Slovak, and to live and express themselves as Slovaks, which was dangerous at the time. Because this was seen as a rebellion by the ruling Hungarians. And so any attempts at Slovak emancipation were being viewed with suspicion, and later on they were then sort of minimized, and as true, the authorities tried to nip those activities in the bud. So what Pavel Dobzinski was doing, it seems innocent enough now. He was collecting, writing down and publishing fairy tales, but back then it was an act of political rebellion and disobedience, possibly even a treason. So this man actually believed that Slovakia was like a sleeping beauty. It was a sleeping nation upon which a curse was cast. And he and others like him, like-minded men and women, were here to awaken the nation from its slumber by giving them language, by giving them stories, by showing them and shaping their identity so they could speak up, so that they would have some, some arguments behind them to build their political ambitions and social ambitions on. And this was not just about being recognized as a nation, this was also about equality and etc. So collecting these stories was Pavel Dobzinski's contribution to kind of crystallizing what Slovak identity was, who Slovaks were, and that they indeed were special, that they had their own culture, they had their own language, and therefore they deserved to have their own rights and say over their matters in the country in which they lived in, which was back then still the Kingdom of Hungary.
Okay, just for some timekeeping, we're already at the point where we should be doing Q&A, so let's just quickly move forward. We won't cover Anna. Let's skip all the way up. I would say just quickly further, and end it with Zuzka, and then we'll go into Success in the New World, just to quickly move forward so we can have some time for people to ask questions.
So you go. Okay.
Okay, so we were going to originally cover Milan Rastislav Štefanik, one of the founding fathers of the Republic. Next, we wanted to actually end it with a woman, with someone who's very much a mover shaker right now on the political scene, which is Zuzana Čaputova, but we don't have time. So we're going to quickly touch on the super Slovaks that actually had success in the New World. So we have more of those featured in this book, but we decided to showcase 3 of them. I don't know if any of you guys know who these men are. Does anybody know?
Eugene Cernan,
Yes.
one of them.
Yes, one of them. And anybody else? Sorry, Zuzana, I didn't hear you.
Is it Otto, the contact lens?
No. So Eugene Cernan, yes. The one on the left in the brown suit, that is Michal Bosak. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
No? Okay, and the gentleman on the right, or I don't know how it's viewed for you right now with the purple background, that's Ladislav Hudek. So here are 3 examples of Slovak success in the New World. Eugene Cernan, he's probably the most successful, or in Slovakia, they refer to him as the Slovak that got the furthest. He was actually the last person, one of the last people to walk on the moon. He was part of a NASA-led 3-day expedition to the moon, where they collected samples and rocks, etc. So he actually walked on it. But he is the grandson of Slovak immigrants. He actually grew up on a farm. Like many Slovaks that were an agrarian culture here, they transplanted that agrarian culture to the New World. So he learned to tinker with machinery there. And actually, that's where he first birthed his dreams of being up in the sky. He was a fighter pilot during World War II. And from then on, he took his ambitions further with NASA and actually going into space. The gentleman on the left is Michal Bosak. He is one of the many Slovaks that left to the New World on the conversion of the 19th and 20th century because of the conditions Gabriela mentioned earlier, the oppression of the Magyars, poverty, and just the difficulties of life, and the unfreedom or the lack of freedom we face for our religious beliefs, for our civil rights, or for being able to be Slovak and speak Slovak. 1/3 of our nation actually left. They went to the New World mostly in search of work. Michal was one of them. He was from Eastern Slovakia. He came to New York City when he was 18 years old with €1 in his pocket, $1, in his pocket. And he did the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs that many Slovaks did. He first worked in the mines, then later he worked in the railroads before he went on to work in industry. But actually in America, that's when his entrepreneurial spirit was ignited, and he actually accumulated wealth or became a millionaire and multi-millionaire later by securing small loans, first within his own community. So the Slovak communities were usually part of these ethnic enclaves, ethnic clusters that were formed mostly around church, so religious life, but also community life through these fraternal organizations, etc. So Michal went on to actually establish a bank. And at the time in the United States, banks were printing their own money. So Michal's name and face appeared on US, I believe, dollar banknotes for a time. And Ladislav Hudek is one of my favorite super Slovaks in the book. This is also because my mother was an architect, but he was an architect. Now he's very interesting because he's born, his father was, I believe, Hungarian. His mother was Slovak. So he was born of mixed identity in a time where Slovaks actually were quite hybrid. They would speak Slovak or identify as Slovak, but also speak Hungarian. So this was the case in Ladislav Hudek's case. He was born in Banska Bystrica, but life pushed him beyond Slovakia. He eventually found himself living in China, in Shanghai, and he made history by building the first skyscraper in Asia. After his stint in China, he returned to Europe. Actually, he found himself in Switzerland, but the developments in post-World War II Europe were quite frightening. And in 1950, he re-emigrated, this time to the United States, following the communist coup of Czechoslovakia. And he established his life in California, working as a professor at University of California, Berkeley. This is where actually he ended his life with his family around him. But his dying wish was actually to be buried in Slovakia, which pays homage to actually he truly felt to be Slovak, because the Hungarians also claim him as one of their superheroes or super Hungarians. And finally, in the 1970s, his remains were actually transplanted to Banska Bystrica, where he is indeed now buried in the cemetery. So here's an example of Slovak success in this new world. Thank you so much for paying attention to us on this presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. I know that the museum actually does have a copy of this book, so if you're interested to learn more about the personalities, you can of course purchase a copy there. But we're actually here now to open it up for Q&A, so maybe we can close the PowerPoint so we can have the full screen. Any questions? And also the audience joining us from the museum. Don't be shy. This is the best part. Yes, Susanna, if you could unmute yourself, please.
I've always heard a lot about Jan Hus. Now, I guess he was a Czech. Is that why you left him out of the history? Because I think he made tremendous advances in the religious Reformation. Unfortunately, it was burnt at the stake. So I'm wondering why he was not mentioned.
Exactly, he was a Czech.
Because he was
That's
Czech.
right.
Oh,
Yes. And he's, I mean, you know, the movement was the biggest in Bohemia and in the Czech lands, and it spilled over into Slovakia, of course. So he had a presence here. He fought many battles here, but he identified as a proud Czech. So henceforth, we did not include him in this book. But we did have Jan Jesenius that Zuzana talked about today, who kind of represented the kind of that history of interreligious conflict and who had roots in Slovakia.
thank you. I have a further question. My
Sure.
relatives do not have a really good relationship or feeling toward the Hungarians. They even say that they're responsible for the break between the Czechs and the Slovaks. Is that still prevalent, or although my relatives feel that? Do you have any take on the relationship between the present day Slovaks and Hungarians, many of whom live in Bratislava?
So I'm just going to jump in a little bit and Gabby will answer the rest. Yeah, there are still tensions. I mean, the Magyarization was not that long ago, and there's still a lot of sour feeling towards that period when Slovaks were punished for being Slovak, for speaking their language, practicing their culture. And of course, after World War II, when there were the population exchanges with Hungary, you know, there's numbers that range that 90,000, but actually upwards to 400,000 Hungarians were repatriated back to Hungary in exchange for, some say 90,000 to up to 200,000 Slovaks. So it's still a very, very sensitive issue when you have so many people that were relocated to a country where they actually, of course, they culturally are affiliated with Hungary and linguistically, but they actually didn't ever live there. They lived in Slovakia. So it's still a very sensitive and tense issue that continues to affect even the political situation in Slovakia right now, vis-a-vis the Citizenship Amendment Act, for example, and the limitation of dual citizenship in Slovakia.
So it's mostly a political thing. You know, when it comes to day-to-day communications and functioning, there is no, it's fine. You know, we get on, we get by. It's when the politics come in and the sensitive buttons are pushed that the national sentiments on both sides arise. And it's still a wound that we need to heal. You know, as Zuzana said, it was not so long ago, but we also believe that we need to talk about it from a higher perspective, because Slovaks and, you know, our part of Europe was part of the Kingdom of Hungary for nearly 1,000 years. And Magyarization only affected the last 70 years. It was unfortunate, it was unfair. People died for being proud Slovak. But, you know, it's still history that we need to kind of digest and process as a nation and as a region.
And also just to show the complexity of the identity in our region. I mean, we were part of the Kingdom of Hungary for a very long time. We're also located in the heart of Europe. The capital of Slovakia today is Bratislava, but before the elapse of World War I, it was only 15% Slovak. So it was actually majority Hungarian, German speaking, and Jewish. So this just shows, in terms of these mass relocations that happen, what kind of a scar it left in Slovakia in terms of human capital losses. And the identities themselves of Slovaks are complex. You know, from my grandmother's family, there's a Hungarian lineage that comes through me. Gabriela herself actually carries a Hungarian name. So that again attributes to the complexity, as we identify as Plaid Slovaks, but we actually also have Hungarian roots within our own DNA.
And also it's good to, it's just on the, to the little side note, this is also an emotional issue for the Hungarians, not just for the Slovaks, because we touched upon it today when Hungary was occupied by the Ottomans, sort of 16th century ish, for 150 years, which is a long time. They had to move all the seat of the parliament as well as the religious center from Hungary, where the Ottomans were, into Slovakia, because Slovakia was mountainous and it was easier to defend. So this is when Hungary survived. This land offered a refuge. So Hungarians see it as very important to their history and their culture too. So yes, it's complex and it's layers upon layers of history, and we definitely need to have more of a dialogue there. Thank you for the question, Sana.
John, you had a question?
Well, yes, I had two things. One is, I thought your explanation of Slovak-Hungarian relationships was absolutely brilliant. It's about the best that I've ever heard from anybody. My question is, I would like to give you an excuse to say something about the president, Zuzana Čaputová. I mean, she's so extraordinary. So in the form of a question now, I'd like to create some space for you to tell us something about her.
I'll leave that over to Gabby because she was actually presenting on hers. So I'll pull a picture up of her meanwhile.
So Zuzana Čaputová is a very important chapter in our history. She's actually making and rewriting history as the first female president. And not only is she the first woman president, the way she rose to that position is also exceptional and extraordinary, because she was not a politician. She was not really known in Slovakia prior to her decision to candidate for the president. So nobody really believed her. She was cute, but she was an underdog throughout the presidential campaign. The way she captured people was through her authenticity and just her genuine communication, the way she carries herself, her politeness in the world of politics that often it just gets dirty and nasty when it comes to these positions such as prime minister and president. But she didn't play along. She is a firm believer in what was her slogan?
Yeah, stojíme oproti zlu, alebo we fight against evil. Boj oproti.
She believes in decent politics, so she's not one who would be fighting and manipulating and throwing big words around, and that really resonated with the people because that was something different. She kind of seemed like the queen from the fairy tales, if she doesn't just live in her castle, she comes down to discuss with her people what bothers them. And it was a great surprise when she won to many. And it's been 2 years now that she has been in the office. And she's setting a whole new standard for politicians and for public representatives in high functions, just by the way she represents Slovakia, by the way she behaves, which was witnessed once again during the papal visit that we had in Slovakia last week. So she's much loved by the Slovaks. She is envied by, when we speak to Czechs, they go like, oh, we're so jealous of your presidents. The same goes for the Hungarians. So yes, she's very much an icon. And she made that miracle all by herself.
And is it not true that her popularity is actually rising as she functions in office?
Yes, through her stability and the consistency of her high performance, there's more and more convertees, I guess, that really see the value of Zuzana's role as a stateswoman and as a representative of Slovakia.
Yes, thank you for giving us the excuse, Johnny.
Yeah, we would love to have an audience, actually, a question from the audience in the museum, please.
That was actually our question. We wanted to hear more about her. So does anyone else have any other questions?
What's the relationship between Slovakia and Moravia? I heard them speak a little bit about Moravia. Is there some kind of a relationship there?
Did you guys hear that? Could you tell us more about
we did.
You heard it? Good. Perfect.
Yes, we did. Okay. So it's a funny one. So Moravia is in the very east of the Czech Republic. And there are actually no natural dividing lines between Western Slovakia and Eastern Czech Republic. So this region historically evolved sort of side by side and in great closeness, which is felt until today in the way we speak. So the dialect in Moravia and in Záhorie, which is the neighbor of Moravia, it's the very western part of Slovakia, is very similar. The people are similar. They have a similar attitude to life and the philosophy. There are both of these regions are winemaking regions, which is an interesting one because again, it's the closeness, geographic, but also just the nature of the landscape and of the environment is similar. So I actually come from Záhorie. I was born near the border of Moravia, as was the first president of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk. So officially, it's said, the story goes that he was born in Hodonín, which is a small town close to the border with Slovakia. But there are some people who question this, and they say that he was actually born in Kopčany, which is just on the other side of border, and it's in Slovakia. So that kind of demonstrates just how close we are historically and as people. Almost everybody has a family on the other side of the border in Moravia and vice versa. So that contact, I would say, is pretty much problem-free, and we like each other. There's much cultural cooperation between the region going on there as well. A lot of Slovak students study in Brno, is the capital of Moravia. I sometimes like to refer to myself as the Slovak Moravian, being proud of their cultural, of our joint cultural heritage. So I hope that answers the question.
And linguistically, also Czech Moravians speak much. I call it the Slovakized Czechs. So it's a Czech that I very much understand. Whereas when I go further west into Czechia, Prague, etc., I have a harder time understanding. But with Moravians, it's very, very fluid to speak with them.
Oh, and also we were connected in the past by a trade route called Česká cesta, or the Czech road, which connected Slovakia with the Czech lands, and it was one of the most important trade arteries that ran through the region. So that again fostered that closeness and that mutual understanding.
Any more questions, please?
Go ahead.
I just want to ask about your efforts related to expanding or facilitating citizenship for Slovaks abroad. If it's possible to speak about that.
So there's been a novelization to the Citizenship Act that was passed by the government, the seat of the government this summer, and now it's gone before Parliament to be actually officially voted and approved before it's stamped by President Chaputova as sealed. And this amendment is very, very interesting, particularly for Slovak descendants, because for the first time since 1989, there's actually an extension of Slovak citizenship for Slovak descendants up to the 3rd generation. So that would open it up for a lot of people, but particularly descendants in America and Canada, where the largest migration waves went. Statistically, right now at the Slovak Academy of Sciences, they say there's about 800,000 Slovak Americans, but a 1990 US census actually showed that about over 2 million people identified to having Slovak roots or Slovak ancestry. So the numbers could actually be much larger than that. Global Slovakia is part of a movement called One Slovak Family, and we're campaigning members of parliament, political leadership, as well as decision makers in Slovakia to amend the novelization slightly more. We're very grateful for this novelization. We're very grateful for the opportunity of Slovak citizenship being extended to Slovak descendants. However, there is a clause in there that would require Slovak descendants to actually come to Slovakia and physically set up residency here before they could request citizenship. And this is very much different from what the Czechs are doing. They're allowing Czech descendants to actually apply for Czech citizenship and secure a Czech passport from Czech consular offices or Czech embassies abroad. Hungarians are doing the same. Poles have also liberalized it a great extent. So the way Slovakia is implementing this law would still be rather restrictive. There should have been a vote on it this week in Parliament, but they've postponed it for about another month. We're still confirming that. So it looks like there will be 2 more hearings that will happen before we'll finally know for sure whether they have dropped the residency requirement or they opted to leave it in as a security measure. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
So it's 10 o'clock here, so I believe 1 hour is up.
Yeah, so we can take one more question and then we will close it off.
Go ahead. Yep.
So what percentage would you say of Slovaks in Slovakia speak English? Is it extremely low?
I think it's for the young generation, it's very much common for young people to speak some English, and that's expected of all Europeans because of the age of mobility and after the Cold War, when English became much more accessible in Slovak classrooms. As you know, before 1989, Russian was taught as a second language in schools as well as German. English was much more difficult to get to, but after that geopolitical collapse, English accessibility, and also because of the internet, it's very common. But for older people and to just get around in terms of services, that there is more limitations.
And of course, it's always easier in Bratislava or in cities than in the countryside or in small villages. So English is, once you get beyond the first 4 years of primary education, I believe that's where you choose whether you want to study English or German. So it's compulsory to choose one, and then you continue learning that language until you leave the school. So it's a good amount of years to dedicate to the language, to at least have some basic speaking capacities.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Susie?
Yeah, sure. I was just waiting for our host to hand it over. Oh, okay, they closed it off. All right, so I'll close it off here. Well, thank you very much for everyone that joined us. John, Susanna, Robin, and Deb, we don't see you, but we wish we could. Or Robin, we also don't see you, but we at least have your picture here. So it was a great pleasure to connect with you this evening. Once again, we hope you join our next webinar, which should be happening on October, Gavi. It's about the Rusyn culture. So we're excited to dive into that because we're going to be learning alongside with you about this unique and important community in Slovakia and the Carpathian region at large.
And to stay sort of up to speed with the events that we're holding, you just need to head to our website. globalslovakia.com and sign up for our newsletter, and that way you will receive all the news and all the invitation to our online events, most of which are free and open to everyone. So please stay in touch. If you have any stories that you would like to share, we always love to hear from you. And we thank you for spending this Saturday with us and with Slovakia. And we hope that you have found this not just interesting, but perhaps you learned something new about your roots, your ancestors, and their land.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Take care.